Well, a new Leger poll suggests that the BC Conservatives are building momentum ahead of polling day. It has the party at 46% ahead of the NDP's 43%. And the Conservatives are ahead of the NDP by 5 points in the voter-rich region of Metro Vancouver. Well, this morning, NDP leader David Eby is launching his party's platform. And can the NDP turn their fortunes around? Right now, we're joined by UBC political scientist Stewart Prest. Good morning to you.
Morning, Stephen.
So we have the poll showing Conservative support, BC Conservative support. We have to make that distinction since the Conservatives themselves are not. BC Conservative support at 46%, the NDP fallen behind to 43%. What does the NDP need to do to move the needle?
It's a great question because at this point, it does seem like they need to do something. They have to initiate because they can't just coast to victory. It's amazing the way this race has changed in the last 2 weeks, let alone the last 6 months. But they really need to find a way to convince British Columbians that they are going to put the province on the right track, and particularly around issues of affordability and economic performance. Because we see, digging into the numbers of that Leger poll a little bit, we see that it's among those who are worried about the economy or focused on the economy, the NDP just has no traction at all. And I think the biggest number, the real concern for the NDP is this sense that more than half of respondents, and this echoes things we've heard for the last number of months, more than half of British Columbians I think the province is heading in the wrong direction. And so we have a large pool of voters who are just essentially deciding whether they can trust the Conservatives to try something different at this point. And the NDP have to right that ship and say that, no, they're going to turn things around and take the province in a better direction going forward.
But translate that for me. When you say to somebody, do you think the NDP is taking the province in the wrong direction? And they say yes. What are they saying yes to?
It's a great question because this is a phenomenon we see outside of BC. We see it across Canada. In many ways, we see it right across the democratic world, a sense of frustration with incumbent governments, with the way things are. And so I think it's a difficult thing for the NDP to respond to here in BC and so much of what people are frustrated with is a national or even global phenomenon. But I think above all, there has to be this sense that the NDP is the party for British Columbians. And one of the gaps that we see that Mr. Eby himself is more popular than his party, and so a sense that these kinds of promises that they can roll out with regard to say affordability, tax relief, and so on, that they add up to I guess a vision for the province is the way to describe it. That all the money that the province is spending on housing and so on is adding up to a better direction for the future. And that's a case that the NDP have tried to build now for some time, but so far without success.
The point of any political campaign is to get one central message, to punch it through, to get it to voters, to have it, be what people are thinking about when they get into the voting booth. How have the BC Conservatives done at that, and what do you see as their message?
I think the Conservatives, in some way, they had a difficult challenge introducing themselves to voters, but they had this enormous advantage with that kind of brand recognition with the larger federal Conservative brand, and they really leaned into that. And so I think once they establish that connection with voters, that this is a reliable brand, then their job is to really just say that things are bad and you are unhappy with good reason, and so you should try something different. We're going to really put money back in your pocket. So we see a lot of individual promises from the Conservatives rather than big systemic solutions of the kind that the NDP has been trying to focus on, say on housing and so forth.
Right.
And it seems like that kind of messaging has really broken through. It gives the sense that, yeah, we see your problems and we are the ones who can do something about it.
Well, right. And we're going to put more money in your pockets because nobody knows how to spend your money better than you do.
That's right. It's that message of individual accountability and responsibility. And the Conservatives have tapped into it using the same language as the federal Conservatives. So we really do see that drafting behind Mr. Poilievre and the federal Conservatives.
And so then what would you see as the message that the NDP is trying to push through, what they want voters to be thinking about when they're in the polling booth?
I think the NDP really has to somehow simultaneously say that they have a larger vision for the province. And it's clear that on things like housing, they are putting in place a lot of if you like, macroeconomic solutions that are going to take time to have an effect, but do have a real chance of, say, bending the cost curve on housing and so on, or building a new medical school to increase the supply of medical professionals. These are long-term solutions to systemic problems, and somehow they have to convince British Columbians that these are the right answers, even though they haven't had time to work. And in the meantime, they're going to continue to do enough to provide immediate relief. And so they're trying to do that. You can see that in the different programs they're running out, but it's hard to deliver that dual message, and they're going to have to find a way to unite it and make it simple for British Columbians to understand.
I just want to ask you about something else entirely, which is, well, I suppose it's related because we talk a lot about the resource industry in regard to this election. Burnaby City Council just signed a $20 million community contribution agreement with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's interesting because we don't normally think of major municipalities as signing those agreements. We think of that as being, some small town or even a First Nation along the pipeline route signs those sorts of community agreements. What does that do for council's ability to criticize the operation should something go wrong with the operation?
It's a good question. It does throw into the relief, the combined interests of industry and government, and those are often there implicitly anyways, but it makes it that much more explicit. And so it is going to be, I think, a challenge, and perhaps the council will want to think about ways to show that they can independently continue to represent the interests of voters that don't align with business at the same time as they're continuing to cooperate with business, and that is a tall order, and perhaps ultimately up to voters to keep an eye on things.
Stewart, always great to hear you. Thank you so much for being available for us, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And take care. Stewart Prest, UBC political scientist.